A farmer's plow struck a 2,000-year-old message in the deep south. This is the Alabama stone, a slab of sandstone carved with ancient Greek letters, found impossibly far from home. It is one of North America's most perplexing archaeological riddles. By the end of this, you will understand every twist of this enigma, from its muddy discovery to the incredible journeys it implies. We will examine the clear text of the inscription, meet the experts who were baffled by it, and explore the spectrum of explanations, from clever hoax to proof of a lost voyage. How did a piece of the classical world end up buried in an Alabama field? And who was trying to tell us something? The story forces us to question everything we think we know about the ancient map. What does it take for a single object to rewrite history? The plow turned up something solid, something that should not have been there. It was the late 1960s, on a quiet farm near the banks of the Tennessee River in northern Alabama. The farmer, going about his seasonal work, felt the resistance and heard the scrape. He likely expected another stubborn piece of local limestone, a nuisance to be cleared. But what he pulled from the earth was different. It was a large, flat slab of sandstone, roughly 2 feet long, a foot wide, and several inches thick. It was heavy, a dense physical object weighing perhaps 40 or 50 pounds. At first glance, it was just a rock, but as the soil was brushed away, a pattern emerged. Carved into its face were rows of precise, angular markings. They were not random scratches from the plow. They were deliberate. They were organized. And they were utterly alien to that Alabama soil. In a field that had known only the tracks of tractors and the roots of crops, the farmer now held a message. The immediate mystery was not yet about translation or origin. The first, chilling question was far simpler. This stone did not belong. Every instinct of local history said such a thing was impossible. So what was it doing there, buried and waiting? Word of the strange carved rock spread through the local community, a curiosity that quickly outgrew the farm. The farmer, realizing this was more than a simple obstacle, likely reached out to local historians or perhaps a nearby university. The first experts to lay eyes on it would have been struck by a profound sense of dissonance. In the context of North American archaeology, finds are typically Native American artifacts, colonial-era items, or natural formations. A slab of sandstone with neatly carved markings fit none of those categories. The immediate, professional instinct in such situations is skepticism, a protective reflex against forgery. Could this be a modern hoax, a prank planted to confuse? Yet the stone itself argued against that. It was heavily weathered, its edges softened by time, and it bore a patina of age that seemed consistent with a long burial. The carving, too, was worn, the grooves filled with the same hard, packed earth that surrounded it. A forger would have needed to bury it for decades to achieve such an effect, a long game for a very local, obscure joke. As the stone was carefully cleaned, the true nature of the markings came into focus. They were not crude imitations, they were letters, and to the astonishment of those first observers, they were recognizably Greek. This was the moment the mystery transformed. It was no longer just a question of an odd rock. It was the shock of a specific, sophisticated alphabet appearing in the wrong chapter of history, on the wrong continent. The script was a ghost from the classical world, whispering in an Alabama field. Key figures entered the story here. Scholars like Dr. Joseph Mahan, an archaeologist with a deep interest in unconventional finds. He would become one of the stone's primary investigators, a man caught between academic caution and the thrilling possibility of a paradigm-shifting discovery. His careful examination, and that of other epigraphers brought in to consult, would begin the long, contentious process of trying to understand exactly what the stone said, and more importantly, what its silent presence meant. The letters themselves, once cleaned, presented a stark and undeniable message, carved across the sandstone surface in a clear, angular style known as the Greek majuscule script. They formed two distinct lines. The characters were not the flowing cursive of later periods, but the formal, capital-like letters used in monuments and official inscriptions from the classical and Hellenistic eras. They read, from top to bottom, a declaration frozen in stone. The first line held a single word. The second line contained two more. To an expert in ancient Greek, the translation was startlingly direct. The most widely accepted reading translates to, I am of Xenon the Athenian. Let us break that down, because every word carries immense weight. I am is a simple statement of existence. Of Xenon uses a grammatical construction indicating possession or origin. It tells us this object belongs to a man named Xenon. The name Xenon itself is a genuine and well-documented ancient Greek personal name. And finally, the Athenian is a demonym, a powerful identifier stating this Xenon hailed from the city-state of Athens, the heart of classical Greek civilization. So, in its entirety, the stone proclaims, this object is the property of Xenon, an Athenian. It is a tag, a label, a claim of ownership stamped upon a piece of portable stone. The grammar and letter forms are consistent with inscriptions from around 2,000 years ago, showing none of the errors or anachronisms a modern forger might inadvertently introduce. The style is confident and correct, the work of someone literate in the language, carving a message meant to last. This was not a random doodle or a magical incantation. It was a practical, mundane statement of identity, which makes its location all the more profoundly bewildering. Why would an Athenian named Xenon need to label a slab of sandstone in what would one day become Alabama? That simple declaration, I am of Xenon the Athenian, presents a problem of time as much as place. To understand the stone, we must first understand when it was carved. This is the work of paleography, the meticulous science of studying ancient handwriting. Experts in this field do not just read the words, they interrogate the very shapes of the letters, treating each curve and angle as a chronological fingerprint. They placed the Alabama stone under this exacting lens. The script is a Greek majuscule, the formal capital letters used for inscriptions, but the style of these letters evolved over centuries. An alpha from the 5th century BC looks different from an alpha carved in the 2nd century AD. The experts, scholars like Dr. James R. Harris, who published detailed analyses, focused on specific characters. They looked at the alpha on the Alabama stone. It is written with a broken crossbar, a specific design that became common in the Hellenistic period and continued into the early Roman era. They examined the omega. Its particular rounded shape with upward curling ends is a style not seen in the classical period, but is well documented in inscriptions from the first few centuries after the birth of Christ. Even the overall stance of the letters, their proportions and the spacing between them, fits a specific window in time. By comparing every character to vast databases of known inscriptions from across the Mediterranean world, from Athens to Alexandria, a clear pattern emerged. The stylistic signature of the Alabama stones carving most closely aligns with examples from the 1st or 2nd century AD. That is the Roman imperial period, a time when Greek was still the lingua franca of the Eastern Mediterranean, used by scholars, traders, and sailors. This dating is crucial because it comes purely from the artifact itself, independent of its impossible location. The science of the letters points to a craftsman working around the time of the Roman emperors Trajan or Hadrian. So we are not dealing with a prehistoric mystery or a medieval curiosity. We are confronted with an object from the peak of the classical world's reach, bearing a personal name from its most famous city. The paleography tells us when Xenon likely lived. It does not, however, explain how his labeled property crossed an ocean he never knew existed. This disconnect is the core of the enigma, a verified message from a verified time, delivered to the most unverified place imaginable. The physical reality of the stone itself became the next crucial witness. This was not just a message, but an object with its own history written in mineral and wear. The slab is a fine to medium-grained sandstone, a sedimentary rock formed from compressed sand. The immediate geological question was a simple one. Is this stone local to Alabama, or is it a foreign rock that arrived with its inscription? The region where it was found is part of the Tennessee River Valley, an area with complex geology, but one dominated by limestone and shale, not this specific type of sandstone. Initial geological comparisons suggested the stone was not native to the immediate vicinity of its discovery. Some experts proposed it could have originated from sandstone formations further north, perhaps in areas of Tennessee or Kentucky, transported by natural forces over millennia. Yet, no definitive match to a known local quarry was ever established. This left a haunting possibility. If the stone was not from there, then both the rock and the words carved upon it were imports. The idea of a 2,000-year-old transatlantic voyage suddenly had to account for the cargo of a heavy, mundane slab of stone. Why bring that? Perhaps as ballast for a ship, or as a durable surface for important records. The geology did not rule out a Mediterranean origin either, as similar sandstones are found across the ancient world. Without a conclusive fingerprint, the stone's birthplace remained ambiguous, a blank space on the map that fueled speculation. More telling than its origin, perhaps, was its condition. Experts scrutinized the carved grooves under magnification. The weathering within the letters was deep and consistent, showing the same patina and erosion as the stone's surface. This was not a fresh, cut later stain to look old. The grooves themselves had been exposed to the elements for a very long time. The edges of the inscription were softened, not sharp, as would be expected from centuries of natural sandblasting by wind and rain if it had been exposed, or from chemical processes if it had been buried. The tool marks visible within the grooves suggested the use of a metal chisel, not a modern power tool. The chisel strokes were deliberate and showed the skill of a practiced hand, someone accustomed to working in stone. This physical evidence built a strong, circumstantial case for authenticity. The object felt old. It acted old. Every scientific test applied to its surface, and its carving pointed toward a genuine antiquity. So the investigator is left with a puzzle where both the message and the medium seem legitimately ancient, yet they exist in a location that defies every conventional narrative. The science of the stone does not solve the mystery. It deepens it, transforming a curious story into a tangible artifact that refuses to be easily dismissed. Any artifact that defies history invites immediate suspicion. The most logical, and for many scholars the most comfortable, explanation for the Alabama stone is that it is an elaborate modern hoax. This is the default position, the null hypothesis that must be conclusively disproven before any more extraordinary claims can be considered. So let us put the stone on trial with the charge of forgery. First, we must establish motive. Why would someone create such a thing? The possibilities are varied. It could have been a simple prank, a farmer's elaborate joke meant to baffle his neighbors. It could have been an attempt at local fame, to put a small Alabama community on the map. More intriguingly, it could have been a piece of deliberate evidence planted by someone hoping to prove a pet theory, specifically the idea of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact. The mid-20th century saw a surge in popular interest in such ideas, with books and articles speculating about lost Roman voyages or Phoenician traders in the Americas. Creating a tangible piece of proof would be a powerful, if fraudulent, way to win that argument. Next, we examine means. This is the hoax theory's greatest challenge. To create the Alabama stone, A forger in the 1960s would have needed a very specific set of skills. They would have required a deep, working knowledge of ancient Greek, not just the alphabet, but the grammar and linguistic conventions of 2,000 years ago. They would have needed expertise in paleography to replicate the exact style of lettering from the correct historical period, avoiding anachronisms. They would have needed the practical skill to carve those letters expertly into hard sandstone with period-appropriate tools, and then the knowledge to artificially age the inscription and the stone in a way that could fool geologists and archaeologists, who in rural Alabama at that time possessed this rare combination of classical scholarship and artistic craftsmanship. It is not impossible, but it narrows the field of suspects dramatically to perhaps a handful of highly educated individuals. Finally, we look at opportunity. The stone was not discovered during a controlled, professional archaeological dig. It was plowed up by a farmer. Its exact depth, its precise orientation, and the undisturbed soil layers around it were not documented by experts. This fuzzy provenance is a classic red flag in archaeology, as it allows for the possibility that the object was placed there recently. A forger could have buried the stone a year or even a decade before, letting natural processes begin the aging, waiting for an unsuspecting discoverer. The lack of a clear chain of custody from the moment it left the ground weakens the stone's defensive case, yet the arguments against the hoax are equally compelling. If it was a prank, it was an incredibly sophisticated one that produced no immediate payoff, no confession, and no local notoriety for its creator. If it was for fame or to prove a theory, why has no one ever credibly stepped forward to claim responsibility in over 50 years? The forger would have achieved a masterpiece of deception, only to remain silent forever. Furthermore, the weathering and patina on the stone and in the grooves have been consistently described by examining scientists as authentic and difficult to replicate convincingly in a short time frame. The hoax hypothesis is a necessary and sobering lens, but when held up to the artifact itself, it begins to show cracks. It requires us to believe in a phantom forger of genius-level skill, who executed a perfect crime for no apparent reward, leaving behind an object that continues to puzzle experts to this day. The balance of the evidence makes this simple explanation feel strangely incomplete. The world of academic archaeology moves cautiously, built upon layers of verified evidence and reproducible context. Within this careful framework, the Alabama stone presents a profound dilemma. Its treatment by the mainstream archaeological community has been, for the most part, one of respectful silence. You will not find the Alabama stone featured in major textbooks on North American prehistory. It is absent from the syllabi of standard university courses. Its details have not been debated in the pages of premier journals like American Antiquity or the Journal of Archaeological Science. This is not necessarily a dismissal of the artifact itself, but a reflection of the field's core methodological principles. Archaeology reconstructs history not from singular, spectacular objects, but from patterns. A civilization leaves behind a scatter of evidence, a constellation of pottery shards, building foundations, burial practices, and tool fragments that together tell a coherent story. A single, stunning find without that supporting context is called an out-of-context artifact. It is a data point floating in a vacuum, impossible to connect to any known cultural sequence. The Alabama stone is the ultimate out-of-context artifact. There is no ancient Greek settlement layer beneath that Alabama field, no associated coins, no pottery, no ship timbers, no other inscriptions. It is a solitary whisper in an empty room. For mainstream scholars, this isolation makes it scientifically inert. It cannot be used to build a new historical narrative because it has no archaeological family. The guiding principle here is often summarized by the famous axiom: Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. To claim that ancient Greek or Roman sailors reached the interior of North America 2,000 years ago is undoubtedly an extraordinary claim. The Alabama stone, however compelling, is a single piece of evidence. It is not, by the strict standards of the field, extraordinary enough. It would require a corroborating discovery of similar scale, a shipwreck, a settlement, a cache of artifacts, to move from an intriguing anomaly to an accepted historical fact. This high bar exists for good reason, to protect the historical record from well-meaning errors and deliberate frauds. Have any reputable institutions engaged with the stone? Yes, but in a limited capacity. Individual scholars from respected universities have examined it and published their analyses in more speculative or interdisciplinary journals, or in books focusing on archaeological mysteries. The stone itself has been displayed on occasion, often in local historical societies or museums of curiosities, rather than in the halls of great national institutions. Its home is the realm of the anomalous, the fringe, where it is studied not as proof of a new history, but as a persistent question mark. This marginalization is not a conspiracy to hide the truth. It is the default position of a conservative science. The stone remains in a kind of academic purgatory, too authentic to be casually dismissed as a fake, yet too isolated to be welcomed into the official story. Its power lies in its stubborn existence, a quiet, unyielding challenge to the map of the ancient world as we think we know it. But if the stone is not a forgery, then its presence demands a story. The most direct narrative is also the most astonishing. Theory 1 proposes exactly what the inscription implies. An ancient Greek, a man named Xenon from Athens, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean and into the heart of North America. To even entertain this, we must first understand the world he would have left. By the 1st or 2nd century, Greek and Roman ships were masters of the Mediterranean. These were not tiny, fragile rafts. They were substantial wooden vessels, powered by sail and oar, capable of carrying tons of cargo across open water for weeks at a time. Their captains navigated by the stars, by the sun, and by a deep, accumulated knowledge of winds and currents. The Phoenicians, their legendary predecessors, were said to have sailed beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, and down the coast of Africa. Could one of these ships have been pushed farther, much farther, into the unknown? Ancient historians like Diodorus Siculus recorded tantalizing rumors. He wrote of a Libyan sailor whose ship was driven by fierce storms for many days, finally washing up on a large, fertile island far to the west. While these tales were considered fanciful geography, they reveal an ancient awareness that the ocean might not be an endless void, but a passage to somewhere. So the capability for a long, accidental voyage existed. A ship caught in a powerful Atlantic storm, a current like the Gulf Stream, could theoretically carry a vessel from the coast of North Africa or Iberia across to the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico. This is not a guided tour. It is a desperate saga of survival, a ship and its crew at the mercy of the sea. If they made landfall, say on the coast of what is now Florida or Louisiana, what then? The stone's location is inland, along the Tennessee River, which connects to a vast network of waterways flowing into the Gulf. A curious or exploring crew, traveling by small boat or even on foot, could have moved north from the coast. Perhaps Xenon's stone was a piece of ballast, or a portable altar, or a navigational record he inscribed, and then, for reasons lost to time, left behind or buried as a marker. The romantic appeal of this theory is immense. It paints a picture of brave, lost explorers, classical men walking under the dense canopy of an American forest, utterly disconnected from their world. Yet, for all its narrative power, the theory crashes against a wall of silence. Where is everything else? A single ship making such a voyage would have been a floating village. If it wrecked, there should be traces, iron fittings, pottery, amphorae, coins. If the crew survived for any length of time, they would have needed to eat, build shelter, make tools. They would have left a scatter of evidence, a campsite with foreign objects. Not one shred of such corroborating archaeology has ever been found along the logical routes this journey would have taken. No Roman coin in a Florida swamp, no piece of distinctive Greek pottery in a Mississippi riverbank. The Alabama stone stands utterly alone, a solitary footprint with no body to go with it. This isolation is what makes the Voyager theory so compelling to imagine and so difficult for science to accept. It asks us to believe in a ghost ship that sailed into history and then vanished without a single other trace. The stone's inscription speaks Greek, but the world it came from was increasingly Roman. By the 1st century, Athens was a revered but subdued city within the vast Roman Empire. A Greek-speaking sailor named Xenon could easily have served on a Roman vessel, a cog in the machinery of the greatest maritime power of the ancient world. This shifts the theory from a lone Greek adventure to a potential Roman expedition, a possibility that gains weight from other scattered, controversial finds across the Americas. The most famous of these are the Roman coins, a handful of bronze and silver pieces, minted with the faces of emperors from the 3rd and 4th centuries, have been unearthed in places like Venezuela, the coast of Maine, and even a riverbank in Texas. Like the Alabama stone, each coin is an isolated anomaly, discovered far from any other Roman material. Their official explanation is often that they were lost by modern collectors, perhaps carried as curiosities by later European settlers. Yet, their persistent appearance on different coasts fuels a tantalizing question. Could a Roman ship, perhaps a merchant vessel blown off course or a naval galley on an exploratory mission, have reached the New World? The Roman Empire possessed the ships, the navigational skill, and the relentless drive for trade and resources that could theoretically motivate such a long-range voyage. They knew of the Canary Islands and the Azores, stepping stones into the deep Atlantic. A determined or desperately lost captain might have pushed farther. If such a ship did make landfall, what purpose would the Alabama stone serve? Its message is personal, not imperial. It does not proclaim for the Senate and people of Rome. It states a simple fact of ownership for one man, Xenon the Athenian. This could point to a more intimate function. Perhaps it was a grave marker carved by surviving comrades to honor a sailor who died far from home, buried along a foreign river. It might have been a territorial claim, a way for an individual or a small group to say, "We were here, and this place is connected to us." Or it could have been a navigational marker, a heavy stone intended to be left at a turning point on an inland journey, a promise to return that was never fulfilled. The stark contrast here is profound. The theory invokes the organized, monumental force of the Roman Empire, yet the artifact it leaves behind is cryptic, personal, and utterly lonely. There is no grand colony, no military outpost, just a single name on a rock. This either suggests a fleeting, accidental contact so brief it left only one deliberate trace, or it tells us that the stone represents something else entirely, a story not of empire, but of individual survival against impossible odds. The Roman connection widens the historical stage, but deepens the mystery of the script, transforming Xenon from a potential explorer into a possible lost soul of the classical world, whose only memorial lies forgotten in an Alabama field. Perhaps the stone's journey was not ancient, but medieval. A third theory attempts to soften the impossible leap across time by placing Xenon in a later, yet still mysterious, chapter of history. This idea shifts the timeline forward by 1,000 years, from the Roman Empire to the world of Byzantine monks and Norse explorers. By the early Middle Ages, the Greek language was no longer the tongue of Athenian philosophers, but the sacred script of the Eastern Orthodox Church, preserved in monasteries from Constantinople to the remote corners of the known world. Could the inscription be medieval Greek, a script we have simply misdated? Paleographers are firm on this point. The angular majuscule letters on the Alabama stone are characteristic of the late Hellenistic and early Roman imperial period, not the more rounded, minuscule scripts that became standard in Byzantine manuscripts after the 9th century. The stone's handwriting, in essence, is an anachronism if carved after the fall of Rome, yet the theory persists, not in the letters themselves, but in the journey they might have taken. Imagine a different vessel, not a Roman galley, but a Norse gnar, the sturdy, broad-beamed ship that carried Leif Erikson and his crew from Greenland to the coast of North America around the year 1000. We know the Norse reached a place they called Vinland, now identified as Newfoundland. Their settlement at El Ants Ox Meadows is proven, accepted history. But their travels did not end there. Sagas speak of expeditions farther south, exploring down the eastern seaboard. Could a Norse ship, venturing into the Gulf of Mexico and up the river systems, have carried a passenger who was not a Viking? This is where the theory weaves a speculative thread. The medieval world was more connected than we often assume. A Greek-speaking monk or a Byzantine trader could have found his way to the Norse trading networks in the North Atlantic. He might have been a captive, a traveler, or a man seeking a new world entirely. If such a person joined a Norse voyage westward, he would have brought his language and his faith with him. The stone, then, might be a devotional object, a portable altar, or a marker of thanks for a safe landing, inscribed with his name and origin in the formal script he knew from religious texts. This scenario bridges two known points: the Norse presence in North America and the survival of Greek literacy in the medieval period. It offers a slightly more plausible maritime pathway, using the proven seafaring technology of the Vikings as the delivery vehicle for a classical message. Yet, the evidence remains painfully thin. No Norse artifacts have ever been found in the American South. No longhouses, no iron nails, no distinctive oval brooches. And the stone's script remains stubbornly, technically ancient, a style a medieval Greek would have no practical reason to replicate with such archaic precision. This theory feels like a compromise, an attempt to fit a square peg into a round hole by sanding down the edges of time. It acknowledges contact while trying to stay within the bounds of accepted history, but in doing so, it creates new questions without answering the old ones. If Xenon was a medieval traveler, why did he carve like a Roman? There is another path, one that stays firmly on dry land. This theory asks us to consider a more recent, yet still peculiar, journey. What if the Alabama stone is exactly what it appears to be, a genuine 2,000-year-old Greek inscription, but its arrival in that field had nothing to do with ancient sailors? Instead, imagine it as a treasured fragment of the old world, carefully packed and shipped across the Atlantic, not in a Roman galley, but in the wooden crate of a 19th century immigrant. This idea connects the stone to a fascinating chapter in history, the era of the private collector and the cabinet of curiosities. From the Renaissance onward, wealthy Europeans developed a passion for assembling rooms full of wonders. These cabinets held everything from exotic shells and stuffed birds to Roman coins, Egyptian scarabs, and inscribed stones. They were personal museums, displays of knowledge, wealth, and worldly connection. As Europeans settled in America, this tradition crossed the ocean. Early American antiquarians, often gentlemen scholars with classical educations, eagerly sought out relics of antiquity to display in their studies or libraries. A carved Greek stone would have been a prized possession, a tangible link to the civilizations they admired. Perhaps a merchant or a scholar emigrating from Greece or Italy brought the stone with him as a memento of home. Maybe it was purchased from a European dealer by a wealthy southern planter with an interest in the classics. For a time, it would have sat on a shelf in a plantation library or a townhouse parlor, a conversation piece for educated guests. This theory neatly solves the core linguistic and paleographic puzzles. The stone is authentic because it is authentic, just not archaeologically placed. It explains the Greek script, the correct dating, and the skilled carving because it was simply removed from its original context in the Mediterranean and transported as a collectible. The mystery then shifts from an ancient voyage to a more modern misadventure. How did it go from a collector's shelf to a buried position in an Alabama field? The required series of events becomes convoluted, but not impossible. Think of the upheaval of the 19th century in the American South, the Civil War, economic ruin, and the great dispersal of property. A family fortune is lost, an estate is abandoned. In a hurried evacuation or a haphazard sale, a box of curios is discarded or misplaced. A heavy stone might be tossed into a wagon as ballast or used as a doorstop in a barn and eventually forgotten. Over decades, a building collapses, the land is reclaimed by forest, and the stone sinks into the soil, waiting for a farmer's plow to find it a century later. This terrestrial theory is elegant in its simplicity. It requires no lost Roman fleets, no lone survivors. It only requires human carelessness and the relentless passage of time. Yet, it too leans on a profound absence of evidence. No bill of sale, no diary entry, no inventory from a known collection in the region has ever surfaced mentioning such a distinctive artifact. It asks us to believe in a perfectly silent chain of ownership, where a valuable classical antiquity entered the country, was cherished, and then vanished from all record just before it was physically lost. While this might be the most academically comfortable explanation, it still leaves the stone story incomplete, a genuine ancient message that became a modern ghost, haunting a field with a history it never actually witnessed. The most radical explanation for the stone dismisses the Greek connection entirely. What if the entire premise is wrong? What if we are not looking at an ancient message, but a trick of geology and perception? This theory confronts a fundamental human trait. Our brains are wired to find patterns, especially familiar ones, in random noise. This is called pareidolia, the phenomenon that lets us see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and yes, perhaps letters in natural stone fractures. Proponents of this view argue that the markings on the Alabama stone are not deliberate carvings, but the result of natural weathering. Sandstone is a layered rock, and it can fracture in straight lines and sharp angles as it weathers and exfoliates. A series of such fractures, intersecting at just the right angles, could theoretically create shapes that look remarkably like the angular letters of a Greek majuscule script. To a hopeful eye, especially one primed by stories of lost civilizations, these random lines could be assembled into meaningful words. The process is subconscious. We connect the dots our culture has taught us to see. If you showed the same stone to someone from a culture with no exposure to the Greek alphabet, they might see only cracks in a rock. This theory is a powerful reminder of how expectation shapes interpretation. It suggests that the entire mystery of Xenon the Athenian is a collective illusion, a story we have projected onto a blank slate of stone. Yet, this explanation faces a formidable obstacle: the consistent testimony of experts. Geologists and epigraphers who have handled the stone do not describe vague, shallow scratches. They report clear, V-shaped grooves with sharp interior angles, the unmistakable signature of a metal chisel being struck into stone. The lines are too deep, too uniform, and too intentionally arranged to be easily explained by natural fracturing, which tends to create more chaotic, irregular patterns. Pareidolia might explain why we read the marks as Greek, but it struggles to explain why the physical marks so perfectly mimic the product of human toolwork. A middle ground exists within this radical idea. Could the marks be human-made, but not Greek? Perhaps they are indigenous symbols, carved by Native American cultures centuries or millennia ago, that through an incredible coincidence resemble a specific Greek phrase. The indigenous peoples of the Southeast, like the Mississippian culture, did create sophisticated art and iconography, often abstract and geometric. While their symbols do not typically match the Greek alphabet, the possibility of an unknown, localized set of markings cannot be entirely ruled out. An even more speculative twist on this suggests mimicry. If by some vanishingly small chance, a lone ancient traveler did make contact with a local tribe, could a native artist have seen the stranger's writing and attempted to copy the fascinating, unfamiliar shapes onto stone? This would make the Alabama stone not a direct message from Xenon, but a native artist's interpretation of his script, a souvenir of a fleeting, bewildering encounter. While this idea is captivating, it multiplies assumptions without evidence. It requires the contact, the interest in writing, the act of copying, and the perfect preservation of that one copied object, all while leaving no other cultural or genetic trace. For mainstream science, this chain is too fragile to support any historical weight. Yet, the value of considering this theory is not in proving it true, but in the humility it demands. It forces us to ask the hardest question of all. Are we seeing what is really there, or are we seeing what we desperately want to find? The Alabama stone, regardless of its true origin, holds up a mirror to our own desire for connection, for a hidden thread that ties the ancient world to our own. It challenges us to separate the solid fact of the carved grooves from the beautiful, haunting story we have built around them. The sea lanes of the ancient world were first mastered by a people who left few written records of their own. To understand the deepest roots of transoceanic possibility, we must look not to Athens or Rome, but to the Phoenicians, centuries before classical Greece rose to power. These merchants and mariners from the eastern Mediterranean coast, in what is now Lebanon, built a thalassocracy, a sea-based empire. Their sleek, cedar-built ships, powered by a single square sail and expert oarsmen, became the freighters of the Bronze and Iron Ages. They carried purple dye, glass, and precious metals from port to port, founding trading colonies across the Mediterranean. Most famously, they pushed past the Strait of Gibraltar, establishing outposts like Gadir, modern Cadiz, on the Atlantic coast of Spain. Ancient historians like Herodotus recorded that a Phoenician expedition, commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, even claimed to have circumnavigated Africa. Their reputation was that of fearless explorers who viewed the ocean not as a barrier, but as a highway. If any ancient culture possessed the nautical skill, the shipbuilding technology, and the mercantile drive to attempt a deliberate Atlantic crossing, it was the Phoenicians, and later their powerful descendant civilization, Carthage. This historical context shifts the frame around the Alabama stone dramatically. Could Xenon the Athenian have been a passenger or a captive on such a vessel? By the 1st century, Greek and Roman sailors had largely absorbed Phoenician maritime knowledge, but the ghost of those earlier voyages lingered. A ship blown off course from a Carthaginian trading route off the coast of West Africa could theoretically be caught in the same currents that would later carry European ships to the New World. The stone's Greek inscription would not be out of place in this scenario, as Greek was a common language of commerce and diplomacy in the later Phoenician and Punic world. A multilingual sailor or merchant might naturally inscribe his property in the most widely understood script of his time. This angle connects the Alabama stone to one of the most persistent and controversial threads in alternative archaeology, the idea of Semitic, particularly Hebrew or Phoenician, presence in ancient America. The most famous piece of evidence in this debate is the Bat Creek stone, discovered in a burial mound in Tennessee in the late 19th century. That small, inscribed stone was initially thought to contain Cherokee characters, but in the 1970s, a prominent epigrapher controversially declared it to be Paleo-Hebrew, specifically a phrase meaning "for Judah." The academic community remains deeply divided, with most dismissing it as a probable hoax or a misidentified Native American artifact. Yet, for those who believe, the Bat Creek stone and the Alabama stone form a haunting, if speculative, geographical pair, two inscribed stones found in the same general region of the American Southeast, each whispering in a different ancient tongue of the Mediterranean. Other alleged finds, like the Paraíba inscription from Brazil, which purported to be a Phoenician account of a storm-driven voyage, have surfaced and been largely debunked. The pattern is always the same: a solitary, cryptic inscription with no archaeological context, igniting fierce debate and then fading into the realm of the unproven. The Phoenician hypothesis for the Alabama stone is compelling because it roots the mystery in a culture of proven, extraordinary seafaring. It provides a plausible maritime engine for the journey. But it suffers from the same devastating lack of corroboration. Where is the Phoenician pottery, the distinctive glass, the evidence of a camp or a shipwreck? A single stone is not a colony. It is not a trade network. At best, it could be a desperate token from a ship lost beyond all hope of return, a sole physical testament to a voyage that ended in silence. This theory does not simplify the enigma. It expands it, placing the lonely figure of Xenon onto a much older and wider map of human exploration, a map whose edges are still drawn in question marks. The Alabama stone does not whisper its secrets in a vacuum. It resonates within a much larger and deeply controversial school of thought known as diffusionism. This is the idea that human cultures spread primarily through contact, migration, and shared invention, rather than springing up independently in isolation. In the context of the Americas, diffusionism poses a radical challenge to the traditional model. That model, supported by most mainstream archaeologists, holds that the great civilizations of the New World, from the Olmecs to the Maya to the Inca, developed entirely on their own, with minimal to no contact from the Old World before Columbus. Diffusionists look at the same pyramids, the same complex calendars, the same myths of bearded gods arriving from the East, and they see not coincidence, but connection. They argue that transoceanic voyages, whether deliberate or accidental, happened far more often than we admit, and that these contacts seeded ideas across the globe. The Alabama stone, with its clear Mediterranean script, becomes a perfect poster child for this worldview. It is presented as physical, tangible proof that the oceans were not absolute barriers, but highways for the exchange of people and ideas long before 1492. This theory found one of its most vocal and prolific champions in a man named Barry Fell. A marine biologist by training, Fell developed a passionate sideline in epigraphy, the study of inscriptions. In books like America BC, he claimed to have identified dozens, even hundreds, of Old World inscriptions scattered across North America. He saw Celtic Ogham script in rock carvings in West Virginia, Libyan script in ancient graffiti in the Southwest, and of course, Phoenician and Greek messages like the one on the Alabama stone. For Fell and his followers, the continent was a palimpsest, a document written over and over by successive waves of ancient visitors. His work was detailed, filled with drawings and translations, and it captured the public imagination with the thrilling suggestion that American history was far older and more interconnected than anyone had dreamed. The Alabama stone fit neatly into this grand, rewritten narrative. It was no longer an isolated oddity, but a single data point in a vast, hidden pattern, a clue pointing to a forgotten age of exploration. Yet, this is where the academic walls come crashing down. Mainstream scholars, particularly archaeologists and linguists, have subjected diffusionist claims and Fell's work specifically, to devastating criticism. The central charge is one of methodological error. Critics argue that Fell and others often engaged in what is called pattern seeking, seeing familiar letters in natural rock formations or in indigenous art that was never meant to be an alphabet. They point out that ancient scripts require specific cultural and linguistic contexts. You cannot simply pick out shapes that look like Greek letters and declare them to be Greek. You must also demonstrate the grammar, the syntax, and the historical context that would make such an inscription plausible. Furthermore, the independent development model is not based on a lack of imagination, but on an overwhelming body of evidence. The archaeological record in the Americas shows a clear, continuous sequence of technological and cultural development, from the first Paleo-Indian hunters to the rise of cities. The pyramids of Mesoamerica, while superficially similar to those in Egypt, are fundamentally different in construction, purpose, and religious significance. Corn was domesticated in Mexico, potatoes in the Andes, achievements that required millennia of local experimentation. To suggest these were imported diminishes the genius of indigenous American civilizations. For these scholars, the Alabama stone is not a key to a hidden truth, but a classic example of an anomaly being plucked from its context and forced into a pre-existing narrative. The stone becomes a Rorschach test to a diffusionist. It is a clear, welcome sign from a lost voyager. To a mainstream scholar, it is either a modern hoax, a misidentified object, or an ancient artifact that arrived through entirely modern, unremarkable means. This fundamental clash is why the stone remains in limbo. It is caught between two powerful ways of seeing history, one that seeks connection across vast distances, and another that respects the profound power of independent human innovation. The stone's true story may never satisfy either side, but its very existence ensures the debate, and the wonder will continue. The Alabama stone is not alone in its defiance. It belongs to a peculiar family of objects that archaeologists call out-of-place artifacts, or ooparts. These are discoveries that seem to break the rules of history, appearing where and when they simply should not. Each one is a puzzle piece from a different box, challenging our established timelines. Consider the Kensington runestone, found in Minnesota in the late 1800s. It's a slab of gray-wacky stone carved with runic letters that tell a dramatic story of Norse explorers from the year 1362, far inland from any known Viking settlement. Like the Alabama stone, its text is clear, but its context is maddeningly solitary. No Viking longhouses or Norse tools were found nearby, leaving experts to debate for over a century whether it's a genuine record of an extraordinary journey or an elaborate hoax by Scandinavian immigrants. Then there's the main penny, a small silver coin minted in Norway during the reign of King Olaf Kyrre in the late 11th century. It was uncovered during a professional archaeological dig at a Native American site in Maine. Its provenance is solid. It was truly buried centuries ago, but it is one single coin. Was it traded hand to hand from a Viking settlement in Newfoundland down the coast over generations, or did it arrive much later through other means? It proves contact was possible, but not its own specific story. Further south, in Mexico, a small terracotta head with unmistakably Roman features was found buried in a pre-Columbian site at Tecaxic, Calixtlahuaca. Dated to around the 2nd century, its style is foreign to Mesoamerican art, yet it was discovered in an undisturbed archaeological layer. Is it evidence of a transatlantic voyage, or could it have been introduced by a Spanish colonist centuries later, somehow working its way into an ancient stratum? The pattern linking these objects is unmistakable. They are almost always solitary. They appear with ambiguous or hotly contested provenance, and they offer a tantalizing glimpse of a connection that, if proven, would rewrite chapters of history. yet they lack the supporting evidence to build a new narrative. The Alabama stone fits this pattern perfectly. It is the Greek language counterpart to the Norse runestone and the Roman coin. It presents the same frustrating, beautiful dilemma, an artifact that feels too authentic to ignore but too isolated to believe. These parts collectively form a chorus of whispers from the past, each singing a different but equally compelling song of what might have been. They remind us that history is written by the victors, but it is sometimes hinted at by the lost. The stone's silence is now being challenged by the tools of the digital age. While the core debate has simmered for decades, modern technology offers a new way to interrogate this ancient object, moving beyond the naked eye to a realm of microscopic detail and elemental fingerprinting. The most promising avenues involve non-invasive techniques that would not damage the artifact. High-resolution laser scanning could create a perfect three-dimensional model of the stone's surface, mapping every groove and weathering pattern with sub-millimeter precision. This digital twin would allow researchers from anywhere in the world to study the inscription, measuring the depth and angle of each chisel stroke to determine the tool type and the carver's handedness. It could definitively show whether the grooves are uniform and V-shaped, confirming human toolwork, or if their profiles are irregular, suggesting natural fracturing. Furthermore, advanced photogrammetry, using hundreds of overlapping photographs, could reveal faint, worn markings invisible to the unaided eye, perhaps even traces of pigment if the letters were ever painted. On a chemical level, portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometry could be employed. This handheld device can analyze the stone's elemental composition without taking a sample. By scanning the surface, it could detect trace elements within the sandstone itself, creating a geochemical signature. This data could then be compared to geological databases, potentially pinpointing the stone's quarry, whether in the Mediterranean basin, the American Southwest, or somewhere else entirely. Even the patina, the thin film of age on the surface and inside the letters, could be analyzed to confirm its authenticity and approximate its age through micro-erosion analysis. The potential for these technologies is immense, yet their application to the Alabama stone has been limited. No major institution has undertaken a comprehensive, peer-reviewed study using the full suite of modern analytical tools. The stone's status as an unprovenanced anomaly makes it a low priority for academic grants, which tend to fund research within established archaeological contexts. However, independent researchers and documentary filmmakers have shown renewed interest. In recent years, teams producing programs on historical mysteries have occasionally sought access to the stone, using improved camera technology to capture its details in new light. These efforts, while less rigorous than a full scientific study, keep the stone in the public eye and occasionally bring fresh perspectives. A documentary team might consult with a geologist or a materials scientist who notices a previously overlooked feature. The digital age also allows for crowdsourced investigation, where images of the stone can be examined by a global community of epigraphers and archaeologists, though this can lead to a cacophony of opinions rather than consensus. The enduring lesson here is that the case is not closed. The Alabama stone remains a physical object in the modern world, waiting for the right combination of scientific curiosity, technological access, and funding to subject it to the scrutiny it has always warranted. A definitive answer may still be possible. A laser scan could settle the carving debate. A geochemical analysis could trace its journey. Until such a study is done, the stone holds its secrets, a relic of the ancient world that is also a test for our own, challenging us to use our most advanced tools to listen to its 2,000-year-old whisper. Beyond the academic debate, the Alabama stone has taken on a vibrant second life in the realm of popular imagination. Its journey from a farmer's field to the pages of speculative fiction is a testament to its unique power as a story. While mainstream archaeology may keep it at arm's length, the world of alternative history has embraced it wholeheartedly. The stone is a staple in books that explore pre-Columbian contact, featured alongside the Kensington runestone and the Newport Tower as a key piece of evidence in a hidden historical narrative. Television documentaries on ancient mysteries and unexplained phenomena regularly give it a segment, its enigmatic inscription glowing under dramatic lighting, while narrators pose tantalizing questions about lost voyages. Countless websites and online forums are dedicated to dissecting its every groove, with amateur sleuths and professional researchers alike debating its origins in endless, passionate threads. This artifact has become a cultural touchstone for those who suspect our history textbooks are missing a few thrilling chapters. The stone's appeal for storytellers is immediate and potent. For a novelist crafting a historical thriller, it provides the perfect inciting incident, a tangible clue that launches a quest for a lost Greek colony in the American wilderness. Game designers have used similar concepts, weaving plots where players uncover ancient Mediterranean artifacts in unexpected places, solving puzzles left by stranded explorers. Its simplicity is its greatest strength, unlike a complex archaeological site requiring expert interpretation. The Alabama stone presents a clear, human-scale puzzle. Someone carved this. Someone named Xenon from Athens wanted this object to be identified. That personal connection bridges 2,000 years, inviting us to empathize with a single individual lost in a vast, unknown land. We are not asked to understand an entire civilization's migration, just one person's improbable journey. This makes the mystery intimate and deeply compelling. Furthermore, its incongruity is perfectly crafted for drama. The location is not just far from Greece. It is specifically mundanely American, a cotton field in Alabama. The contrast between that humble setting and the classical grandeur of Athens could not be sharper. It is the ultimate fish-out-of-water story, but for an object. This dissonance creates a cognitive itch that demands to be scratched, a feeling that there must be a story here, a fantastic tale of storm-tossed seas, river expeditions, and a final, lonely act of marking a presence in a new world. The stone offers no answers, only a pristine question, and that blank space is where imagination thrives. It allows everyone, from the serious researcher to the casual viewer, to become a detective, to fill in the gaps with their own version of events. In a world often explained by science, the Alabama stone remains gloriously unexplained, a permanent invitation to wonder. It proves that sometimes the most powerful historical artifacts are not those that tell us what happened, but those that forever ask us, what if? The stone's romantic story faces its most rigorous test in the cold light of skeptical analysis. To accept it as genuine ancient evidence, one must dismantle a formidable wall of counterarguments, each built on the bedrock of standard archaeological practice. Let us revisit the hoax theory, but with a sharper lens on capability rather than just motive. The idea of a rural farmer crafting this inscription is easily dismissed, but what of a more sophisticated creator? The mid-20th century American South was not a cultural desert. Universities with strong classics departments existed. A professor, a graduate student, or a well-read amateur with a passion for ancient history and a talent for stone carving could possess the precise skills needed. This individual would have had access to academic resources, books illustrating Greek epigraphy, and the knowledge to avoid anachronistic letter forms. The act of carving the stone, artificially aging it with acids or repeated burial, and planting it in a field becomes a feasible, even straightforward, project for someone with the right education and determination. The motive might not have been fame or money, but the intellectual thrill of creating a perfect puzzle, a test for the establishment. or an attempt to physically manifest a beloved historical theory. The decades-long silence of the hoaxer is not mysterious. It is a feature of the con, the ultimate satisfaction coming from watching experts debate the creator's flawless work. This critique then turns to the stone's profound isolation. In legitimate archaeology, context is everything. A single artifact is a sentence, but the soil around it is the paragraph, the chapter, the entire book that gives it meaning. The Alabama stone has no context. Its discovery was unrecorded by professional standards. We do not know its exact depth or the stratigraphy of the soil that held it. More damningly, there is no associated material culture. If Xenon the Athenian or any Mediterranean voyager traveled to the interior of Alabama, they did not travel alone. They would have brought supplies, tools, weapons, clothing, and containers. They would have eaten, built shelter, lit fires, and inevitably lost or discarded items. Yet not a single corroded Roman nail, not a shard of distinctive Greek or Roman pottery, not a single coin or bead has ever been found in association with the stone or along any plausible route from the coast. A journey of such magnitude leaves a scatter of evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs. The Alabama stone is presented as a single, massive loaf with no crumbs anywhere to be found. This absence is deafening. For an archaeologist, it is the equivalent of finding a single modern car key in a medieval castle dungeon with no car, no keychain, and no record of how it got there. The simplest conclusion is that the key is a later, accidental introduction. This leads directly to the guiding principle of Occam's razor, the philosophical tool that suggests the simplest explanation, requiring the fewest assumptions, is most often the correct one. Apply this to the stone. Explanation 1: Ancient transoceanic contact. This requires us to assume a successful, unrecorded sea voyage of staggering distance, the survival and inland travel of the crew, the carving and abandonment of the stone, and the complete disappearance of every other physical trace of their presence over 2 millennia. Explanation 2: A modern hoax or accidental introduction. This requires us to assume a skilled individual created or imported the stone and left it in a field, or that a collector lost it. The second explanation is demonstrably simpler. It operates within a documented framework, modern humans moving objects across the ocean. It does not require rewriting the historical and archaeological consensus on pre-Columbian contact. It posits a single, modern event rather than a cascading series of ancient improbabilities. From a strict analytical standpoint, the weight of logic tilts heavily toward a modern origin. This is not a dismissal of the stone's intrigue, but a necessary grounding. The stone's greatest power may not be as proof of a lost voyage, but as a mirror reflecting our powerful desire to find such proof, and the rigorous discipline required to separate that desire from verifiable fact. That name, Xenon, carved so carefully into the stone, is more than just a label. It is a doorway into a specific person's world. In ancient Greece, Xenon was not a rare or mythical name. It was a solid, respectable choice, derived from the Greek word xenos, which means stranger or guest. This is a beautifully ironic choice for our mystery. A man whose name literally meant stranger potentially becoming the ultimate stranger in a distant land. The name appears in historical records, on pottery shards, and in tomb inscriptions from the classical period onward. It belonged to real people, citizens, merchants, perhaps soldiers. So the stone does not give us a legendary hero's name, but an ordinary one, which in some ways makes it more believable. This was not an Alexander or a Pericles making a grand claim. It was a Xenon, an everman of the ancient world, asserting his identity on a piece of sandstone. But it is the second part of the inscription that carries even heavier cultural weight, the declaration that he was an Athenian. By the 1st or 2nd century, When this stone was likely carved, Athens was a shadow of its former political self. It had been absorbed into the Roman Empire for centuries. It was no longer a military or economic powerhouse, but something perhaps more potent, a university town, a living museum, the revered birthplace of philosophy, drama, and democracy. To call oneself an Athenian in this era was not necessarily a statement of current political power, but of profound cultural pride. It was an affiliation with an idea, a golden age of human achievement. For a man traveling far beyond the borders of the known world, that identity would have been a cornerstone of his self. Imagine him, whether a sailor, a merchant, or an exile, in a place utterly foreign. The languages around him are incomprehensible, the landscapes unfamiliar. In such profound isolation, the things that define you become your anchors. Your name, your city, your language, carving I am of Xenon the Athenian onto a durable piece of stone, could have been an act of profound psychological necessity. It was a way to say, I exist, I am from somewhere, I am not lost to history. This transforms the stone from a simple property marker into a potential testament of loneliness and resilience. The choice of language itself is telling. He did not write in Latin, the administrative language of the empire that ruled his homeland. He wrote in Greek, the language of Homer and Socrates, the tongue of high culture and personal identity. This suggests the carver was educated, literate, and deeply connected to his Hellenic heritage. Even under Roman dominion, he was holding onto the most authentic version of himself. So if we grant, for a moment, the possibility that this inscription is genuine and in situ, we are not just looking at evidence of a journey. We are glimpsing the mindset of the journeyer, a man clinging to the last shred of his known world by literally etching it into the landscape of the new. This layer of meaning makes the Alabama stone not just an archaeological puzzle, but a deeply human artifact. The mystery is no longer just about how the stone got there, but about the man who felt compelled to leave this specific, proud, and lonely message behind. A journey of that scale begins with a single, treacherous decision to sail beyond the edge of the known world. For a Mediterranean vessel, the gateway was the Strait of Gibraltar, the ancient Pillars of Hercules. This narrow passage was the psychological and geographical boundary between the ordered world of the inland sea and the vast, terrifying expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. To pass through was to enter a realm of legend and fear, where the rules of coastal navigation no longer applied. Once out on the open Atlantic, the ship would be at the mercy of winds and currents. The most plausible highway across is a system we now call the North Atlantic Gyre. A ship departing from the coast of Iberia or North Africa could be caught by the Canary Current, flowing southward along the African coast. From there, the northeast trade winds would push it westward into the heart of the ocean. The pivotal force is the Gulf Stream, that mighty river within the sea. While it flows northward along the eastern coast of North America, its associated currents and winds could carry a disabled or storm-tossed vessel from the mid-Atlantic on a long, drifting arc. The destination of such a drift would likely be the Caribbean islands or the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. This is not a route of deliberate navigation, but one of survival, a weeks-long ordeal of endless water and desperate hope. The first sight of land, perhaps the green peaks of a Caribbean island or the flat mangrove coasts of the Yucatan, would have been a miracle, but for our hypothetical crew, the journey is only half over. The stone was found inland. To reach the fields of northern Alabama, the travelers would have needed to move from the saltwater coast into the continent's freshwater veins. The Gulf Coast presents two major river gateways. To the west, the mighty Mississippi offers a direct water highway deep into the continent. To the east, the Mobile River system, fed by the Alabama and Tombigbee rivers, provides a more direct path into the very heart of the region where the stone was found. Imagine a small boat, perhaps a ship's tender that survived the crossing, or a vessel built from salvaged materials, entering the mouth of the mobile river. The world would transform from open sea to a dense, humid corridor of cypress trees and tangled vines. Navigation here would rely on following the main current, watching for tributaries, and using the sun for a crude sense of direction. The river itself becomes the map. They would paddle past endless forests, seeing wildlife unlike anything in the Mediterranean, hearing the calls of unfamiliar birds. The Tennessee River, where the stone was ultimately found, is part of a vast interconnected system. It is possible to travel from the Mobile River basin overland to the Tennessee River watershed, a distance of less than 100 miles, or to access it via other connecting waterways, like the Black Warrior River. This leg of the journey shifts from oceanic survival to riverine exploration. What would compel them to travel so far inland? Perhaps they were searching for a place to settle, for higher ground away from the mosquito-ridden coast, or for resources like fresh flint for tools. They might have been following stories from indigenous peoples they met, tales of other strangers or rich lands upstream. Or, in the grimmest scenario, they could have been captives, taken inland by a local tribe, their personal stone carried with them as a sole possession. Every bend in the river would present a new decision, a choice between continuing or turning back, with no guarantee of what lay ahead. The geographical knowledge required for this inland trek is profound, but not necessarily the chart-based knowledge of a classical navigator. It becomes a practical, day-by-day understanding of river systems, of reading the water for depth and current, of observing animal paths to portage around rapids. They would learn to find food, to avoid dangers, and to interpret the landscape not as a map, but as a series of immediate challenges and opportunities. The final act, the carving and placement of the stone, would then be a monumental event. After months or even years of travel, from the marble temples of Athens to the dense forests of North America, a man named Xenon took a chisel to a piece of sandstone. He did not carve a grand epic of his voyage. He carved the simplest statement of self, a declaration that he was still here, that he remembered who he was and where he was from. He placed it, perhaps as a boundary marker for a hopeful new home, a grave marker for a fallen comrade, or a signal for a rescue that would never come. The route from the Mediterranean to an Alabama field is a thread woven from possibility, desperation, and incredible endurance. It is a ghost path on the map, but following it, even in our minds, makes the cold stone feel suddenly, heartbreakingly warm. The very letters we rely on hold their own secrets, while the translation I am of Xenon the Athenian is the most accepted. Ancient Greek is a nuanced language, and a worn inscription of just a few words is a fragile foundation for certainty. Epigraphers examining this stone have proposed subtle but significant alternative readings that could tilt the entire narrative. The first word, often read as the declarative I am, could also be interpreted as a simple possessive marker, changing the emphasis slightly. More intriguing is the phrase, the Athenian. In Greek, this construction can indeed denote a citizen of Athens, but it can also carry the meaning son of Athens, a poetic or honorary title. This shifts Xenon from a mere resident to a symbolic child of the city, perhaps a scholar, an artist, or a philosopher deeply imbued with its culture. Such a man might be more likely to carry the tools of literacy on a long journey, viewing his identity as a sacred thing to inscribe. Other scholars have looked at the grammar and letter forms for signs of an outsider's hand. Is the inscription perfectly fluent? The carving is skilled, but the grammar of the phrase, while correct, is exceptionally terse. Some have wondered if this brevity itself is a clue. A native Greek speaker carving a formal label might use a more elaborate construction. This stark simplicity could be the work of someone with a functional, second-hand knowledge of the language, a sailor for whom Greek was a lingua franca of trade rather than a mother tongue. Perhaps Xenon was not Athenian by birth, but a man from another part of the Mediterranean who adopted the prestigious title, or a merchant who worked the Athenian trade routes. Even a single misplaced stroke in a worn letter could change a word. The final character in the inscription has been debated. Is it a clear N, or could it be part of a common Greek abbreviation symbol? If it is an abbreviation, the whole phrase might be a shortened version of a longer dedication, like in honor of Xenon the Athenian, which would imply the stone was a gift or a memorial placed by others, not by Xenon himself. This linguistic ambiguity opens a cascade of new possibilities. If the carver was not a native Athenian, the stone's journey becomes even more complex. It could have been carved anywhere in the Greek-speaking world, from a port in Egypt to a colony on the Black Sea, and then carried across oceans by a Phoenician, Roman, or even later sailor who acquired it. The stone ceases to be a direct message from Xenon and becomes an object that passed through many hands, its inscription a relic of its original Mediterranean context, not a statement about its final resting place. This interpretation aligns with the collector theory, where the stone's value was its ancient text, not its function as a territorial marker in the New World. Yet, it also fits a scenario of a multi-ethnic crew, where a prized inscribed stone was a shared treasure, a piece of home that survived the voyage only to be lost. The uncertainty in translation reminds us that we are not just decoding language, we are interpreting intent across 2 millennia through layers of weathering and guesswork. The stone does not give us a clear fact, it offers a fragile hypothesis, a name and a city that we then must weave into a story, knowing full well that a single different grammatical choice could unravel the entire tapestry. That stone, with its impossible message, currently resides in a place of quiet custody. It is not displayed in the grand halls of the Smithsonian or the British Museum. Instead, the Alabama stone has found a more modest, yet fitting, home at the University of North Alabama in Florence, a city not far from where it was first unearthed. For years, it was part of the collection of the late Dr. Joseph Mahan, the archaeologist who became one of its most dedicated investigators. Upon his passing, the stone was entrusted to the university, where it is preserved within their archives. This location, deep in the very region that birthed the mystery, feels poetically appropriate. The stone is not lost to time. It is being watched over, studied, and protected. Its condition today is stable, but it bears the marks of its long journey, both ancient and modern. The sandstone surface is worn, the edges soften. The carved grooves, while still clearly visible, show the inevitable dulling of 2 millennia. There have been no major, publicized conservation efforts, likely because the stone is not actively deteriorating in a controlled environment. It is kept in a secure, climate-monitored setting, shielded from the humidity and temperature fluctuations that could cause further stress to its material. This careful preservation is a silent acknowledgement of its significance, whether as a profound historical anomaly or a masterful modern puzzle. For the general public, accessing the stone is not as simple as walking into a gallery. It is not on permanent display. Viewing it typically requires special permission or arrangement, often for academic research or documentary filming. This semi-hidden status adds a tangible layer to its mystique. You cannot simply go and see it. You must seek it out, making the artifact feel like a guarded secret, a piece of evidence held in reserve. There is no grand plaque explaining its story, no official museum label declaring it proof of pre-Columbian contact. Its home is one of scholarly custody, not public spectacle. This very ambiguity about its display mirrors the ambiguity of its origin. Is it kept from view because it is too controversial, too challenging to mainstream narratives? Or is it simply because, as an unprovenanced object with no clear cultural context. It does not fit neatly into any standard museum exhibit. The stone's physical reality in that university archive makes the mystery feel immediate. It is not a legend or a drawing in a book. It is a heavy, tangible object sitting on a shelf, waiting. Anyone with the right credentials can request to hold it, to feel the weight of that sandstone, to trace the grooves of the letters with their own fingers. That accessibility to researchers means the door is never fully closed. A new scholar with a new technology could, at any time, request to examine it and perhaps see something everyone else has missed. Its current home is not an endpoint, but a way station, a quiet library where the stone's single, stubborn sentence continues to await a final, convincing translation. The fact that it is preserved, yet not prominently showcased, tells its own story, a testament to an enigma that remains respectfully unsolved. The weight of all these possibilities can feel overwhelming, a tangled knot of history and speculation. To find our way forward, we must step back from the stories and look coldly at the evidence for each. Let us build a simple ledger, a pro and con list for the three dominant theories, starting with the ancient voyage. On the pro side, this idea has the powerful appeal of direct interpretation. The stone says it belongs to an Athenian, so perhaps an Athenian left it there. The paleography firmly dates the carving style to the Roman era, a time of capable ships. The stone itself shows authentic, ancient weathering. The con side, however, is devastatingly simple. There is no corroborating evidence, not a single other artifact, not a campsite, not a shipwreck fragment has ever been found to support such a monumental journey. The stone is a solitary data point in a vast emptiness, which violates a core principle of archaeology. Furthermore, the journey itself, while geographically possible, would have been an epic of survival with a vanishingly small chance of success, and an even smaller chance of leaving only one physical trace. The theory answers the what but drowns in a sea of why nots. Next, consider the medieval transplant theory. Its primary strength is that it leverages a known historical fact, the Norse presence in North America, to provide a more recent maritime bridge. It softens the technological leap required. The con side is equally firm. The script is wrong. Paleographers are clear. The letters are not medieval Greek. They are centuries older. This theory asks us to believe a medieval traveler used an archaic writing style for no practical reason. It also inherits the Norse problem of no southern expansion. No artifacts from their culture have been found anywhere near Alabama. This idea tries to fit the stone into a slightly more familiar historical box, but the box is the wrong shape and size, leaving awkward, unanswered gaps around the edges of the script itself. Finally, the modern hoax or accidental introduction. The pros for this theory are rooted in logic and Occam's razor. It is the simplest explanation. It requires no rewriting of history, no lost fleets, no silent centuries. It operates within the documented human behavior of collecting, moving, and losing objects. The means and motive, while requiring a specific skill set, are entirely plausible within the 20th century American South. The cons are primarily emotional and evidentiary. It feels unsatisfying. It asks us to believe in a phantom forger of immense skill who never came forward, or in a collector's loss so complete that all record of the stone vanished before it hit the dirt. Yet, critically, it does not contradict any established historical or archaeological sequence. It introduces a single anomaly into the modern era, not the ancient one. So which theory has the fewest unanswered questions? For most scholars, the balance tilts toward the modern origin, not because it is proven, but because it makes the fewest grand assumptions. It does not demand we accept a silent, continent-spanning journey that left no other mark. Its biggest hurdle is the silent creator or the lost provenance. which are gaps in a modern story, not holes in the ancient historical record. The ancient voyage theory, while breathtaking, is built upon a mountain of assumptions, each one requiring its own explanation for a complete absence of evidence. The medieval theory falters on the specific, technical detail of the letter forms. No single theory is perfect. Each one has a fatal flaw, a crack in its foundation that keeps the stone in the realm of mystery. This is not a failure of investigation, but a reflection of the artifact's true nature. It is an enigma designed to resist closure. Your own conclusion will depend on what you find more convincing: the stark, physical reality of the weathered Greek letters in that Alabama field, or the immense, silent void of everything that should surround them but does not. The stone forces a choice. Do you trust the artifact, or do you trust the context it lacks? The Alabama stone rests in its archive, a quiet conclusion to an impossible story. From the scrape of a farmer's plow to the hushed debates of scholars, this slab of sandstone has traveled a greater distance in our imagination than it ever could have on the ancient seas. The facts are stubborn and unchanged. A 2,000-year-old Greek inscription declaring the ownership of Xenon the Athenian was found buried in the soil of the American South. Its letters are real, its weathering authentic, its location baffling. We have walked through every possible explanation, from the simple comfort of a modern hoax to the breathtaking romance of a lost classical voyage. Each theory shines a light on part of the mystery, yet each casts a long shadow of unanswered questions. The hoax theory requires a phantom forger of genius. The ancient voyage theory asks us to accept a journey of epic scale that left only one trace. The collector theory hinges on a perfect modern silence. In the end, the stone defeats them all. It refuses to fit neatly into any box we build for it. This is the power of a true enigma. It does not give us answers. It gives us permission to wonder. It reminds us that history is not just a record of what we know, but a map filled with blank spaces, where a single artifact can whisper of journeys we have yet to imagine. The story of Xenon's stone is not over, because we are still the ones telling it. So what do you think happened in that Alabama field 2 millennia ago? Share your theory in the comments below. If you're captivated by mysteries that rewrite the map, subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten corners of our past. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and never stop listening for the whispers